Finding Your Serenity, a book about ADHD by Sarah Wilson. Introduction. When I look back on my years up until the age of 27, I see a girl who was struggling, but she didn't know the words to even describe why she was or even why she knew she was. On the outside, her life didn't look so bad because she wore a mask to hide her struggles. Plus, it's easy to do so when the people who know you mostly think of you as the quiet one who rarely talks. I don't even know how to begin to explain to you what it was like for me on the inside, but I will try to do so in this book. Perhaps you're on a similar journey and want badly to relate to someone. Or maybe you have just realised that it's possible that you may have the same condition I do. Whatever the reason you are reading my story, I want to thank you for doing so. I felt very misunderstood in my life, and so do many others who have ADHD, whether they are diagnosed or don't even know they have it. By reading this, you are allowing me to share with you my experience of having ADHD, and I am so glad I am able to let you take a peek into my world. I'm far from an expert and more a seeker, sharing my experiences and speculating on different ideas I've had. Of course, each person's experience of ADHD is different, with variations in type of the disorder, traits, symptoms they possess, and individual experiences. But I'd say that everyone who has this disorder struggles with life more so than your average neurotypical person, a word used to describe someone who doesn't have a neurological disorder. There can be comorbidities that are present in the individual with ADHD, and for many, there are a lot of negative consequences that happen because of ADHD, or, as I like to call them, secondary issues. My story is just based on my own experience and perspective. I am not a medical practitioner, and so please don't take any of this book as medical information or advice. I also want to highlight that it is never my intention to romanticize or even invalidate ADHD or mental health. The things I talk about in this book should not be taken as so, as that takes away the reality of the struggles and experiences of those who have been through and continue to go through them. However, I do try to look at silver linings, the positives, and write about things with passion, only because ADHD and mental health issues have not been my only experiences in life, and there are definitely good things about ADHD. There's many things that lit me up and kept me going, and I'm happy I'm able to share with you that it wasn't all bad. For those with ADHD reading this book, I feel that it is my purpose to write to you in an authentic and personal manner in order for you to feel less alone. I hope you come away from this book feeling seen, understood, hopeful, and empowered. I wholeheartedly believe that every single one of you deserves to live a happy, fulfilling life. I also wrote this book for the family, friends, and even co-workers of those with ADHD, because they may have no idea what it is like to experience the struggles of ADHD and to feel very misunderstood by the people around them. All of us want to be seen and to be accepted for our non-conventional ways, and if you don't, then we might just rebel and turn into anarchists. Oh wait, too late. Many of us already are. What makes ADHD so special and worth writing a book on? Everyone has weaknesses, everyone has issues, right? ADHD isn't just something that can be difficult to deal with from time to time. For someone who goes undiagnosed for so long, it may feel like a life sentence. Nothing they do seems to help in the long term, yet they can't figure out why they feel the way they feel. I know firsthand that it affects the individual so much more than anyone that doesn't have it could ever really understand. The overbearing, heavy feeling that there's no way out of the chaotic prison of your busy mind, and then you wake up the next day after breaking down, wondering why it is still so hard to be me in this world. I'm not a writer, just a person who has struggled and wants to help others with this disorder. Chapter 1. It felt like my life had been an inner struggle, at least from when I hit my teenage years until the very moment I stepped into that nature reserve, after making a decision to try something different with my life. When something isn't working for you, you must change what you are doing. Makes sense, right? Nature quickly became my solace, my sanctuary, my escape. Grassy meadows to run through, sturdy aging oaks to lean my back against, a spot of grass by the pond to lay on where I could look up towards the sky through swaying branches to watch 2 beautiful herons fly in circles, and a hidden forest overgrown with ivy that looks more like something out of a magical tale than a real-life place. This place was my own secret garden. It tempted me to climb over areas closed off to the public due to littering, with its low branched trees just asking to be sat in. Every time I visited, I barely saw a soul, and it was the solitude and the distance away from real life that allowed me to feel so free here. It was literally surrounded by houses full of people who, in my eyes, didn't care for it, and perhaps no one ever loved it the way I did. It was a place where I began to heal. The first day I visited is so vivid in my mind. The grass was so long and wet that water filled my shoes. It was April, but spring had not yet visited. The sky was cloudy, there was mist in the air, the trees were bare, and it was bitter cold. Yet it was the beginning of a better life for me. It inspired not only my love of nature to grow, but my creativity to blossom. Whenever I was there, I was filled with so much passion and saw the beauty in everything. Just like one feels when they fall in love for what feels like the first time after a series of encounters you mistook for love. Now you know what love really is like. Whenever I was there, I was filled with so much passion and saw the beauty in everything. Just like one feels when they fall in love for what feels like the first time after a series of encounters you mistook for love. Now you know what love is really like. When you aren't with them, you miss them and think about them. At work, yet again feeling overwhelmed, I'd daydream about being back there. It made me quite miserable to think of the contrast, like I was living 2 separate lives. I visited other woodlands and nature reserves, and it showed me that my passion for nature didn't just lie for that one place, but for all of the natural world. It's funny because most of us live very far from nature, yet it plays a vital role in our lives. It keeps us alive and just keeps on providing for us. However, just spending time in this place wasn't enough. I still had that gnawing feeling that the struggles were just going to come back shortly after going back to real life. Then it was back to feeling as if my time spent there was just a dream and that life wasn't supposed to be that good. Everyone suffers at one point or another, and I know there are people who suffer more than me. But to use that statement to think that my feelings don't matter was wrong of me. I'm not sure when I first thought that the unwanted emotions of mine weren't worth mine or anyone's time. Perhaps it was deep-rooted in me from childhood when I first believed that my feelings came second to other people. One day as a teenager, I recalled an argument at home where I ran up to my room in frustration, slamming the door shut and allowing my back down until I met the floor. Tears streaming, the pain I felt came boiling out like a pan of water set on too high a temperature. It was too late then. I was damaged, broken, alone, and no one cared about me, or so I rather dramatically told myself. Moments before, as I stomped up the stairs, I heard a voice downstairs saying, "It's just her hormones." Many things from my childhood left me feeling unloved, but was I just really sensitive, or perhaps it was both? Whenever I expressed my strong emotions that others couldn't relate to, I was told I was being silly or overreacting, but to me they felt so real. At the same time, I was really uncomfortable expressing any emotions, especially in front of others. I tended to push them aside. The last thing I wanted to do was to talk to people about how I felt, yet if I had done, maybe I'd have gotten the help I needed at a younger age. Sometimes a child's inner voice will become, "I am not good enough, and I am not worthy, and I don't matter," if they are shown that they don't. I found that I clung onto past experiences where I didn't feel loved, but later down the line I wondered if my perception of these may have been skewed by my ADHD and something that many others with ADHD experience, rejection sensitive dysphoria. Did you know that psychiatrist William W. Dodson estimated that by the age of 12, children with ADHD have received around 20,000 more negative messages from the adults in their lives than their friends and siblings who don't have the disorder? Now just imagine how much of an impact this would have on the developing child and how much of that would impact their future and particularly their self-worth. Now I want to make it clear that I don't feel that there's anyone to blame as such here. There's just a lack of understanding of ADHD and also a lack of empathy towards those who experience it firsthand. It might look like a behavioural problem to those looking from the outside, but to those on the inside, it feels overwhelming and something that cannot be controlled, however hard you want to control it. It leaves you feeling very frustrated, and with many ADHDers, in particularly those with late diagnosis, depressed. I guess I was sensitive in some ways, especially as a child, even though difficult memories often float around my brain as if I'm reliving them. As I've grown older and have gained perspective, I know that many people go through so much more and that they just seem to affect me more than they probably should. I think they stick with me because they did have such a profound effect on my emotional life. I perceived threats that weren't really there. My brain translated words, body language, and actions to mean something that wasn't true. And because of the intense emotions I felt at the time, every now and then they popped up into my head to remind myself that I'm not worthy. Or am I just gaslighting myself here? I don't think I'll ever know for sure. Of course, I have a lot of good memories too. When I look back, it's hard for me to put much emotion towards my memories, except for those ones that have a hold on me. I was a very introverted girl who loved to spend time in my own world. My mother tended to give me a lot of freedom to do as I please, and I generally see this as a good thing. It enabled me to spend a lot of time exploring my inner world. A fond memory is when I made up a secret code and used it to spy on people. I'd sit on the front porch and write down my observations about people who walked by. Obviously, I didn't know this wasn't exactly ethical. I blame Harriet the spy. Another little memory I have is from when I was in maths class. At the age of about 9 or 10, I'd rip out bits of paper from my rough notebook, write down what we were learning about, and hide them in my pencil case to take home and write up. I also tried to turn my built-in wardrobe into a den where I could hide and be alone, but whenever I went in there, I just sat in the dark wanting to go and do something else. It was a nice idea though, and having these little secret things that were just mine was a wholesome feeling, and one that I could relate to when I was alone in the nature reserve or the woods. I could have my own things in the world and no one else would ever know what I was doing or what I was thinking. It was a sense of freedom these things gave me that I cherished the most. In moments of solitude, I was often the most content and felt the most like myself, unlike the constant judgment I felt like I experienced when I was around people. There were quite a few mistakes I made as a child, particularly at school, which left me feeling ashamed. One time I signed a card to Sarah from Sarah, so just missing the H off the end, instead of the other way around. Another time I was singled out by a teacher in front of everyone for writing a funny test answer that I hadn't thought through. I didn't understand that they were being mean at the time, but these things would haunt me for years to come, and my feelings of embarrassment around them wrecked my self-esteem and made me more anxious. When I left that school, I remember seeing lots of the other children saying goodbye to each other and getting upset. My mum came to meet me that day and had bought me a stuffed toy as a gift for finishing primary school. I left not recalling feeling any particular emotion, and I wondered why they were making such a big deal out of it. It was the 6-week holiday coming up, and I just wanted to go home. Looking back at the children outside the school building, I didn't understand their behaviour. This isn't particularly ADHD related, but it was at this moment that I realised that I was different to them. Even many of the ones I had called my friends. I didn't see the children like me who just wanted to go home. I'm sure they were there as well. It's just interesting to look back on this and wonder why this moment stands out to me. I had a few friends at primary school, but everything changed when I hit secondary school. I went to an all-girls grammar school, and I knew from day one that I didn't fit in. The other pupils weren't like my primary school friends, and most of them knew each other. Mostly though, I felt extremely self-conscious. I clung onto the downsides of life, blaming other people for my own feelings. Constantly worried what they thought about me, I hid myself away from them. I had 2 or 3 consistently close friends, and without them my entire school experience would have sucked even more. I wished so badly not to care about what everyone thought of me. I admittedly wouldn't live up to my academic potential at times. I did a lot of daydreaming, which is a nice way to describe being distracted by my own thoughts, the point where I would miss the teacher telling us what to do and have to figure it out alone or ask my friend. One time I was asked something and I responded, "I think my friend knows," who was sitting next to me at the time. She didn't seem too happy about this, but I was right, she did know the answer. I definitely said and did some dumb things. I did learn a lot from having smart friends. They were definitely a good influence to me. My friend's father even helped tutor me in physics, which was such a nice thing to do, and I ended up really enjoying the sessions and took a particular interest in that subject. Her parents were so kind to me and they made me want to do well at school and also show that kindness to others. I did well in school, but I think with more self-study I could have done even better. I just couldn't get myself to do it until the last minute. As a teenager, I was so distracted by boys, new friends, and new experiences, and so I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, and perhaps not really caring enough to spend the next couple of years after I'd finished my GCSEs in limbo. I tried something, got bored, and quit, and then I did the same thing the year after. I actually thought I'd just work a part-time job and spend the rest of my days doing whatever I wanted to. My mum said she'd be happy with me doing whatever I wanted to as long as I was happy, but what would make me happy? At the time, I didn't realise it, but my ADHD was probably the reason why I felt so lost. You don't choose the life you were born with, and I've been very aware about that my entire life. I think the combination of having undiagnosed ADHD and RSD is enough to cause someone a lot of hardship in life. As soon as I could move out of home, I did. It wasn't easy. I suddenly had to take care of myself in ways that I did not know how to. With ADHD, I could be impulsive and reckless. I found it hard to manage money, and all it took was one moment of justifying going into my overdraft as I needed this thing, as it would make me happy, and I'd be broke and in debt. It made me happy for a bit, but then I'd later regret it. It was just my brain wanting the dopamine it lacked. Seeing as ADHD has lacked dopamine, it's hard for us to live a mundane life and be happy. Life actually was pretty exciting at times because I made it so. Not long after I became employed, I had moved 30 minutes away from home to be closer to work. I had a flatmate who I worked with and I made some good friends there. It felt like I kind of fitted in there, something I had never felt for the entirety of my life. Yet between the highs were lows. I wanted to constantly find excitement because that's all I knew what felt good. There was no in between my highs and lows. And so I started to really believe that I must have something wrong with me. This made me think about the time we had to take this personality quiz at college. I think it was the Big Five, but I can't quite remember. What I do remember was that the person who was sitting next to us had to mark our answers and I refused. My friend looked at my results afterwards, though, and looked quite concerned. My neuroticism score was pretty high, and I felt so ashamed about it. I had been working with this guy for many months, but I rarely spent any time with him at work because he was on a different shift to me. I found him easy to talk to, and I felt as if we understood each other. So when he came into my shift, it was only natural that we would spend more time together. We became really good friends. I'd go as far as saying we became best friends. Even after work, whenever I had some news, I wanted to share it with him, and so I'd go online and hope he was available to talk. We usually just spent time together with a group of colleagues, either going out for meals or drinks. A few of us started to make a habit of going to McDonald's when we finished early enough. Being young and liking the overtime, we'd often work well over 12-hour shifts, and it was a rarity that we'd finish with enough time to go there. Eventually, it ended up just being the two of us continuing to go. Not only was he caring and non-judgmental towards me, as if there was some unspoken force between us, a mutual understanding of each other, but he was fun to be around, and I'd never met anyone like him before. I could fully be myself around him, and I both admired and trusted him. We started to spend every waking and sleeping moment together. Within 6 months, we rented a house together, a cozy single-story cottage. We were both working different jobs at this point, as our last workplace had closed down. No matter what would happen, I knew we'd be okay. And we were. I had and still have so much admiration and respect for him. I know that everyone says that their relationship is something special, but if soulmates are real, then he is mine and I am his. He was with me through the years I spent in ill health. He was there through the breakdowns, just like the ones I had in my bedroom alone as a teenager when everything felt too hard to deal with. I had felt ashamed of myself, but he played a huge part in helping me to accept who I was. When I first went to see my GP after suspecting ADHD, he diagnosed me with moderate to severe depression and told me I needed counselling. No, I said, I needed to be referred to a psychiatrist. He just wasn't listening. I was so upset, but also not surprised that yet another person didn't understand me or what I needed. This is the experience of many others, and I was sadly already afraid to go, as I was so used to being let down by doctors. I looked online for a private psychiatrist, and knowing how much I was hurting, my partner encouraged me to go and even paid for the session. But first, let me get into why and how I got to that place. Not long after I first stepped into that nature reserve, I was searching online for what could possibly fix me from the awful feelings I had been feeling on a daily basis for quite some time now. The issues with my mind were getting progressively worse. The feelings I had didn't seem to match any condition I had read about. Empty, bored, anxious, frustrated, and overwhelmed. It felt painful to me. My life should have been enough. This particular day, I had stumbled upon a forum with hundreds of answers to the question, why do I feel so bored and empty all the time? I was desperate for an answer for this question, and it was in this forum on this day that one of these answers was meant to be heard by me and was going to change my life. It stuck out to me as it was something I'd never considered before. It read, I have ADHD, maybe you do too. Huh? I thought. Isn't that something children with behavioural problems have? Oh, how I was so wrong. I spent the next few days obsessively researching ADHD, in particular the inattentive type. I applied what I had learned past experiences and how I regularly feel and behave, and felt like I had so much more of an understanding of who I was and why I felt the way I did. I did numerous online quizzes, and each one told me to seek a professional, as it was very likely that I did have ADHD. The most helpful things to me were the personal experiences that other people shared online through videos and articles. I watched and read everything I could. For so long, I knew that I was different. There were things going on inside my mind and that I couldn't figure out, and I couldn't speak about because I didn't have the vocabulary to describe them. I had felt as if I was the only person in the world going through this, yet it was all I ever knew. So how could I tell apart what was normal and what wasn't? After believing that I just had some mental health problems such as anxiety, I tried to heal those. It always seemed that no matter how hard I tried, nothing had ever had any lasting effect. The next day, I'd have to start all over again. Yoga, meditation, and whatever else I used to cope, especially at work, weren't enough to heal me. I had assumed wrongly over and over again the things I needed to heal from. Why else would I be like this? I couldn't figure out until the day I read that forum post. I was lost and confused daily. I don't want it to seem more tragic than it was, but I felt as if I was in a place of suffering and struggling very often. To others, I just seemed myself, as they'd always known me to be. However, one of the reasons I didn't talk much was because my mind was preoccupied on the struggles that I had. I tried not to focus on them, and I tried to focus on the positives. In nature, this worked just fine, but in a busy environment such as work, or even sometimes when I was at home and everything was getting me down, I just couldn't do it. They were so prominent and in my face, like a wasp that doesn't leave you alone, however far you try to walk away from it. The emptiness I felt was harrowing. I would spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to fix it. I'd fixate onto ideals that I thought would change my life. If only I could live in a country that didn't have grey skies, then I'd be okay. I would come up with all of these notions that my life would be better if I wasn't living the way I was. If only I didn't work. If only I could live in the woods. If only I could live the life I wanted to that suited my needs. I'd cling onto these beliefs as if my life depended on them. The truth was, if only my mind wasn't too distracted to see it, was that I was internally suffering. The truth was, if only my mind wasn't too distracted to see it, was that I was internally suffering with ADHD. I truly believe at one point that I'd never really be happy or even content with my life. On the outside, I had so much to be grateful for, yet gratitude was something I struggled to feel for anything. ADHD for the diagnosed, or at least for me, is a more emotional experience than an attempt. ADHD for the diagnosed, or at least for me, is a more ADHD for the diagnosed, or at least for me, is a more emotional experience than an attention one. I've concluded many times that the consequences of ADHD are much more the problem. The common feelings I've had over my lifetime are frustration, overwhelm, and boredom. The worst part was not knowing why. It resulted in me spending a lot of time trying to figure out why I often felt like this, and I'd come up with theories to explain it, but they were all incorrect, and quite frankly, it was wasted time. ADHD explained everything so clearly that I stopped seeking so much to understand and to escape or cure these feelings that were making my life miserable. When you are feeling like this, it can be hard to feel any kind of gratitude. At some stages, I tried to force it by trying to see silver linings out of experiences that had none. I was really reaching for a more positive perspective, to the point where I was just searching for the good things in situations that floored me, and this left me in depressive states. At this stage, I was trying to romanticize my life and look at my troubles as things that have purpose. I was literally romanticizing mental illness and my disorder, which I didn't even know I had. It was like I was clutching onto anything that would keep me hopeful for something to change. I don't think it was wrong of me to do this. I ultimately believe that it was what kept me going. When I found nature, it was something bigger to cling on to, and it helped me really feel some gratitude and appreciation for my life. When I found nature, it was something bigger to cling onto, and it helped me really feel some gratitude and appreciation for life. I had found beauty in a grey world that gave me hope. Chapter 3. I found a doctor not too far from me, and I went to see him 2 weeks after contacting him. The first appointment was an initial assessment. I took away some forms to fill out, 2 for me, 1 for my partner, and 1 for my mum. I sent them back through email, and the second appointment was going through a form called Diva 2. You get diagnosed with ADHD through something called NICE guidelines. I was diagnosed with moderate severity inattentive type ADHD. When I was told that, I thought that I would have been more emotional, but actually I was starting to get a really bad cold and just sat in the office feeling lightheaded and anxious and wanted to leave so badly. There are 3 different forms of ADHD you can get diagnosed with. There's the inattentive type, the hyperactive impulsive type, and then the combined type, which includes both of the above. It's easy to read about these online, and you may already know this, so I won't go into details, but I will say that there can be some overlap. Despite being inattentive, I could also be impulsive, and I think of my hyperactive nature to include fidgeting and having a hyperactive mind. It just didn't show up too much on the outside. I understand that people don't really get what ADHD is, and I've gotten to a place where I'm kind of okay with that. It's not really my issue that they think it's different to what it really is. Even I did. But I do want to educate people on what it is like to actually have it. An inner rather than an outer perspective helps others to empathise, or at least have a better understanding. If you don't understand it, then you aren't purposely ignorant. There is just so much stigma and misunderstanding surrounding it that are fed to us. I'm just so relieved to finally understand why I am the way I am. Realising I needed to get diagnosed and seeing a psychiatrist, I had decided that I wasn't going to try medication. I thought about and researched all of the things that I could try to manage my ADHD without it. I had been doing meditation and yoga for years to help manage my anxious and chaotic mind. The other thing that I've mentioned that has helped me a lot is music and being alone in nature. But what about the days I had to work or do the boring parts of life? Another thing I tried was using a notebook to write out all of the thoughts inside my head after I'd been overstimulated in crowded shopping centres. That helped, but it wasn't something that I could do all the time. Yet it was that one incident where I had to retreat to the car, otherwise I would have melted down in public, that really made me realise that this isn't something I can just treat naturally. On a side note, let me tell you about that day. A few days after going to my first appointment with a psychiatrist, I was at the shopping centre with my partner, and the urge to go and hide in the car was getting stronger. There was so much going on around me that I felt completely overwhelmed. I couldn't keep calm, and I kept anxiously shaking because my body just couldn't keep up with my mind and everything happening around me. It was like the ADHD version of tunnel vision. I was sure the world was going to collapse in on me before I had made it round under the shop. I grabbed the keys, told my partner I'd meet him back in the car, and headed straight for the stairs to the multi-storey car park. I had to get out of here. It was way too overwhelming, and I needed to find solitude and peace. Climbing the steps, an old man zoomed by me, even though I felt I was going as fast as I could. I was struggling, but it wasn't just because of my fitness level, it was because of the mental effort it took me. Just like when I tried to do the washing up, when I hadn't in a few days. It felt like such a struggle internally. I'm sure my partner always thought I was just lazy. Anyway, I spotted the car and headed right to it. I climbed into the passenger side. There was no way I was driving home today. I took out the mini notebook I had bought. I'd seen a video online that people with ADHD should write out their stream of thoughts down on paper. It was meant to help. I began scribbling so many words as I felt tears streaming down my face. I quickly smeared them away with the back of my hand in case anyone saw. I paused and took some deep breaths and began to read what I had written. None of it made sense. I had so many different thoughts about every single thing I was going through at that moment and every single thing that I had seen today, as well as totally random, unrelated things. I still have the notebook today, and it feels a little heart-wrenching reading through it. I want to show you what came out of my mind in those moments. Just imagine that you're reading this entry as quickly as you can. Thursday, the 7th of June, 2018. Page 1. Frustration, overwhelming frustration. Days like this make me feel like I needed meds. I should try them. I feel angry. Woman snorting white powder off mobile. Overwhelmed, dizzy and in need of food and drink and safety. 3.5 hours out and had to retreat to car and home. Drips down car window. Space and time. I don't know. Ruin. Page 2. Silence in huge letters, please. Page 3. Pros and cons of medication with a table. Page 4. Not just being human but struggling. Always watching. It's okay to be here or here. With a little stick man drawing. I want to be me, but more than me. Weird connections in brain. Kinda cool. Escape room, hard to think. Don't know what's going on in mind. Page 5. Natural and unnatural together. Treating ADHD. Quiet, too hot, hungry, but nice weather to chill. Wanted to sit on grass, less input, brain breaks. That's what I need and why I get overwhelmed out, but love being in nature. Quiet, serene nature. Page 6. When I feel that all I do is suffer and struggle more than others, I get depressed. Notice and mindful of this. Give me the rice and chill. Hawaii and Guatemala, both, loud door slam and interruption, have volcanoes erupt close together. Both places I wish to go. I guess I'm scared of dirty water at Guatemala. I wish I wasn't. Favourite Disney movie, Pocahontas, Moana, The Little Mermaid, The Jungle Book, The Lion King. Didn't like them as much as / watched them as a kid and teen. Okay. Deep breaths. We're back to a normal pace again. Just a side note here. These thoughts were going crazily through my mind and I was writing as fast as I possibly could. That was just a minute or two in my head when I was feeling overwhelmed. Welcome to my brain, except at the time I wrote this, I had no stop button and only deep meditation helped me to focus, and only for a short period of time. Well, that's not entirely true. There's this wonderful thing called hyperfocus. ADHD isn't just not being able to focus. It's not being able to regulate focus and attention. It's either a struggle or super easy with no in between. It's no wonder I was suffering with a lot of anxiety, frustration and overwhelm. If you don't have ADHD, could you imagine your brain running that fast all the time? Instead of looking around the room you're in, try thinking about everything you see and hear going on in actual thoughts in your head, and then those thoughts leading to more thoughts about the original thoughts, and then imagine your brain trying to take all of that in at the same time and be able to live a normal life. Now imagine if you're in a crowded place with lots of movement, sights, smells and sounds, and then try to live a normal life. It's impossible, trust me. The only times I really felt any kind of peace were in nature or in meditation, and no matter how much I wanted to, there was no way I could just live my life meditating in nature unless I was to say goodbye to everyone I loved and join some kind of hippie village. I would be lying if I said I hadn't thought about it. Welcome to my overcluttered, scattered and overactive mind. Chapter 4. Some people do find coping strategies that work for them, but after many years of suffering, not just from ADHD, but the mental health implications on top of the disorder, I'd had enough. I had heard bad things about medication, and I was scared, to be honest. I didn't want to experience side effects beyond medication for the rest of my life, my personality to change, or to lose my creativity. It was fear that told me that I've lived this long like this, perhaps I could just carry on. At least I could probably see an ADHD specialist or find a way to cope. Yet it was that very same day I wrote about that made me change my mind. I couldn't really drive, so I sat in the passenger side as my partner began the drive home. During this time, I decided that I needed to make a list of all the pros and cons of taking medication. I listed everything that I thought of down. Then I realised one important thing. If I was going to take medication, there was a chance that I would experience side effects, and there was a chance that it wouldn't work. But if I didn't like taking it, I could just stop whenever I wanted to. It wasn't like I was signing a contract saying that I was committing to it. Just giving it a try sounded less scary. I recognised that one of the main reasons I wasn't going to try it was fear. I already had a lot of anxiety, and the psychiatrist said that the particular medication that I was being given would help me with my emotions, anxiety included. So the only way to improve my anxiety was to take it. To not try medication, I thought, was actually making myself stay in a state of suffering. Ultimately, I was doing this for myself, to give myself the best chance to live a life that I am happy to live. At 27 years old, I had suffered for long enough, and no one had any idea what I went through on a daily basis since, at least from my teenage years, as I don't remember much before them. All that had happened as I grew older was that what I was dealing with was getting worse. I had difficulty regulating my emotions, feeling overwhelmed and frustrated regularly, having anxiety and even panic attacks, not really feeling present with the people I spent time with, living in a chaotic and scattered mind, feeling over and understimulated, feeling overwhelmed in crowds as I couldn't block out the external noise and movement, and feeling less capable than everyone else. Chores were mentally painful for me to do. I was constantly annoyed at myself for not being like everyone else, and I felt behind in life. I covered up my difficulties, pretending to be able to manage my schedule, get things done, and I'd quickly clean my home before anyone visited, because at the last minute, my mind would go into panic mode and I'd just be able to get it all done. I think I did well at school because I was smart and good at cramming information in under pressure the day before an exam, or when homework was due, not because I put a lot of effort in. I felt the same applied for work. I picked things up easily and was able to work many things out for myself, but I still felt very awfully distracted. It was a constant battle to stay focused on what I was doing. I started to sit alone in my car on break times just to recharge a little, as a whole day at work felt really chaotic. I remember getting a promotion, and during the first few weeks, whilst I was learning a lot in a busy environment, I would try so hard to take in what the person training me was saying, that I would be physically shaking with overwhelm and my brain would be all foggy. Yet somehow I was able to push through it over and over again. For it was normal for me to feel this way, and no one else would understand, because it wasn't anything that I, or perhaps even they, could put into words or understand. I thought it was just mental health at the time. It was time for me to give medication a go, and so I informed the psychiatrist that I wanted to try it, who then informed my GP. I had waited a couple of weeks for a blood test and ECG before I started taking it though. I was mostly worried about the side effects, but my doctor reassured me that they mostly disappear within a few weeks. Anyway, he was giving me a really small dose to begin with that would build upon a month at a time. I told him about my fears around side effects, and he reassured me that we are taking it slow and that in general any side effects wear off in a few weeks after starting. The medication that I was trying, I was told, was best for inattentive type ADHD and also those who suffer with anxiety and depression. It had similarities to antidepressants, but was found it had a much better use treating ADHD. I decided that I would start taking it when I wasn't at work, so I could just have a peaceful day at home. I took the first dose, and within about an hour I felt so drowsy and not with it. For such a small dose, I was surprised at how I felt. I lay down on the sofa and watched TV for most of the day. It feels like such a blur to me now. I remember my partner coming home to me, not being my normal self. I was thinking that I could not feel like this every day, and due to my tendency to overthink things, I assumed that the following day would be exactly the same. I woke up the next morning and I felt like the cloud in my head had gone. I had a lot more energy and my brain was much clearer of thoughts. It was an unusual feeling because there had always been so many thought streams happening at the same time in my head and a song playing at the same time. I could barely keep up with my own thoughts, and so it's no wonder I struggled to manage my own emotions. Yet this day I felt different. I decided I felt well enough to drive, and my partner commented on how much better my driving was already. It was only the second day of taking it. Over the next few days, I felt minimum side effects, a bit of a dry mouth and a little bit of nausea, but otherwise I was okay. I experienced so much less anxiety, which was amazing. I finally started to feel in control of my life. Before medication, I would have thoughts about absolutely everything I was doing. So I'd be walking up some stairs and I would have thoughts about that, or I'd be trying to wash up and there was this constant battle going on in my head about it. The boring and difficult things in life were a mental struggle. If you don't have ADHD, there's no way you would really understand this, I think, but if you do, then I have felt your pain so much. It might sound crazy to someone who has never experienced it, but can you imagine how hard it is to go about life with multiple constant negative thought streams, literally thinking about the actions you were taking? I just wanted to tell it to shut up most of the time. Medication, however, was the only thing that really listened. Well, that isn't entirely true, thanks to exercise, meditation and yoga and sound baths. But this was on a whole different level. Is this how calm most people feel? It makes me emotional remembering how I felt at that moment. I'd never felt this calm in my entire life. Over the next few months, I went back to my psychiatrist a few times to report back on my experiences so far and to try a higher dose. On one particular dose, I just felt too drowsy to continue taking it. I had tried to take the medication at night, but the effects still lasted throughout the day. At one stage, I wondered if I was iron deficient because I felt like I didn't have enough energy throughout the day. However, I got a blood test to clear that up and emailed my psychiatrist who told me to go down a dose. I seem to have found the dose that works best for me. No side effects, but I knew I could feel more focused as I had done on the higher dose. But it wasn't worth the drowsiness. One day I got out of bed and felt clear-headed, so I thought I would test something out. I got ready for the day, made breakfast for my partner, and even put his washing on and did the washing up. Before, my mind was so clouded that it was a struggle for me to even get myself to do these things, never mind not having the awful feelings of what can only be described as extreme boredom whilst battling internally with myself whilst doing them. If you have ADHD, you probably know what I mean. Now, I could do those things so much easier. It really does make you feel like an imbecile not being able to do these simple things. Yet we aren't lazy, we have a neurological disorder. In the few years before I got diagnosed, I actually have some good personal video diaries that I made talking about how hard my normal life was at times. Some of these videos showed me talking about some of the crazy things I did, like cycling half an hour to work before a 12-hour shift at 6 a.m, or whatever other spontaneous thing I felt like doing, just so I felt some kind of dopamine rush. It was as if normal things that gave people dopamine didn't do that for me, and I'd have to really go out of my way to get it. Then sometimes I'd get really mad at myself for causing myself harm, mostly financially. If my life was constant excitement or focused around my passions, then I'd feel content, but if it wasn't, then I'd feel empty. It couldn't be exciting all the time anyway, because I'd also be super overstimulated from the excitement. In these videos, I was super fidgety and kept moving around and lost my train of thought numerous times. I was distracted by everything I could hear and even distracted by my own thoughts. I talked about how I was constantly feeling overwhelmed and frustrated, as I've mentioned before. At one time, I thought that I was just a highly sensitive person, and the next I thought I had some kind of mental disorder. I couldn't figure it out, but I tried to over and over again. In one video, I talked about how I was feeling really misunderstood. I was talking about how, when stressful things happen, I have to spend lots of time alone to recharge, and if I don't get that, then I feel so drained. In another video, I talk about how I had just gone for a walk and I was feeling angry. I was mad at my dog for pulling on his lead. I was mad at myself for the way I'd done my makeup. I was mad at myself for not being able to accept that my mental health wasn't good right now, so it was okay that my house was a mess, and I was mad that I had way more off days than good days. Was my life always going to be like this? The videos also reminded me that I had always wanted change. I was never satisfied with the way things were. My brain was wired to want to chase the things that made me feel good, and took my interest all the time, and if I didn't do anything about it, then it was like an itch that got stronger and stronger until I did. I talked about this in one of my video diaries too. One of them starts up with, "I'm not like other people. My life is really hard," despite me not really understanding why. I felt inferior to other people who seemed to have most of their life together. Again and again, I'd think I just had mental health problems, yet other people who talked about their anxiety and depression online seemed a lot different to my experiences. I didn't understand what was wrong with me, and it drove me crazy. Yet with a diagnosis and medication, my life turned around, and I want to tell you how much different it is now. I've mentioned a bit about the calmness I felt and how I was able to be more productive and enjoy the simple pleasures in life that I was previously unable to do. I've mentioned a bit about the calmness I felt and how I was able to be more productive and enjoy the simple pleasures in life that I was previously unable to, but there's so much more. I didn't feel the need to fidget so much. I rarely lost my train of thought. The negative thoughts that I had going through my mind were much easier to silence, and I could actually be present in conversations with people. I feel so much more mature in myself, and I don't feel chaotic anymore. As I previously said, I'd feel overwhelmed a lot, and so I spent a lot of my free time just resting to try and recharge, whereas most people would spend their free time doing housework or spending time with their family or even doing hobbies. I had many interests, and it upset me that I didn't get much chance to enjoy them because I was always so tired and overwhelmed from working. Before medication, if I was having a conversation with someone, I'd often lose track of where we are and have to ask what we were talking about. It made me feel super awkward and gave me a lot of anxiety. Even during mid-conversation, when I was talking, my brain would start thinking about something totally unrelated, and I'd forgot what I was saying. Now I can go back to what I was talking about, which is amazing. The best thing of all, I think, is that I feel so much less anger towards myself. I used to get so mad at myself for getting distracted, forgetting things, that I'd lose everything all the time, and being clumsy. I'm occasionally still a bit clumsy, but much less distracted, and I don't even remember the last time I lost something. Throughout my 20s, my life got harder and harder to deal with. I moved out of home when I was 20, and I suddenly had to do lots for myself. I ended up spending most of these years really struggling. I now feel a lot more confidence in myself. I was told by my psychiatrist that I have been making a lot more eye contact, and I'm not entirely sure if that was originally due to anxiety or just trying to focus, but it's definitely a good thing. I can go out into shopping centres without feeling so overwhelmed and anxious. I didn't like to drive much because I would get distracted easily. I used to have my partner drive the longer journeys away from our local area most of the time, but now I am the one doing most of it because I feel so focused when I'm driving now. I have also driven on much longer journeys, which is definitely something I wouldn't dare to do in the past. I also feel that I can fully be myself more so than ever. Before, I used to hide that I was struggling, and if I did tell someone, then they would never really relate to what I was saying, and in a way, it made me feel misunderstood and ashamed of who I was. Overall, this diagnosis and medication has changed my life, and I am so grateful. Everything was so chaotic and all over the place, and my life now has some structure to it. Things have improved so much since I first went to see the psychiatrist. Life is so hard when you have what feels like a million thoughts running through your head every second, and at the same time there's a song or two playing in your head. You just can't keep track of everything, and it's so hard to act on any of them. Now I can have one stream of thought, albeit less ideas, but I can follow through better with any ideas I do have. I know I haven't explained what ADHD is in terms of traits and symptoms, but my hope was to convey what it feels like, or at least how it has felt for me. There's so many people out there suffering with their mental health who have no clue that underneath their struggles is ADHD, and I wish I could change that. My own GP even said that my issues were depression, and he wouldn't listen when I said that I know I have ADHD. I'm not sure what I would have done if I wasn't able to go private. I wish there was more awareness and support out there for ADHD. Even private health insurance in the UK often doesn't cover an ADHD diagnosis. Diagnosing and treating those with ADHD would have a huge impact on society. There would be less pressure on mental health services and there'd be a lot less crimes, as it's predicted that many people who commit impulsive crimes have ADHD. I think about 1 in 5 people in the prison system, based on a study, have ADHD. I'm not saying that everyone who has ADHD commits crimes, but people who already are more influenced to do so and have ADHD are more likely to act on those impulses. Plus, I do generally believe that crimes are to do with our society on some level. Then there's something really shocking that I've read. People with ADHD have a life expectancy of 13 years less than the average person. I'll let you think about why that might be. Yet I can't help thinking about how much it affects one individual life and how others have spent their lives searching for why they are so different. Of course, ADHD isn't all bad, and one who has the condition doesn't have a life sentence of misery. But it does make life harder for the individual, especially when undiagnosed. If it is picked up early enough in life, the child will begin to understand why they might feel different from others and why they might be struggling, and they can get the help they need. This could be in the form of learning techniques, correct structure, a good support system and coping strategies, and there's a chance then that medication may not even be desired or needed. However, if it goes unnoticed, the child can grow into an adult who feels like they aren't good enough, has poor self-esteem and struggles with their mental health. The problem is that it doesn't always show on the outside, and a child like myself, who is just quiet, naturally smart, appears to just daydream and doesn't like or isn't encouraged to talk about their feelings with their parents, may slip through the cracks and suffer for many years to come until they just can't cope anymore. I do want to mention that not everyone gets on well as well as I did with medication. And they might have to try different types and they might not even get on with any of them. Chapter 5. I will admit that I felt so good for the first few months of taking medication that I didn't think there was anything I could do to make my life any better. Once I'd gotten used to my new way of life, I came across an article about rejection sensitivity dysphoria, sometimes called RSD. It explains a lot of what I went through, and I realised that I still dealt with it to some degree. Most people with ADHD struggle with rejection-sensitive dysphoria. Being rejected hurts us more than other people, and we also experience it a lot more often, even if we try to hide it. This can be directly or it can be indirectly, such as when someone makes a comment about not liking messy people. We then can feel that we are being rejected for being messy, even though it wasn't made directly to us, and feel bad about ourselves and that we are being rejected for who we are. Of course, it can be a lot less subtle than this. And in those cases, we can either get defensive or shut down completely until we can be alone and feel our feelings. As rejection is more painful, we will try to hide parts of ourselves, our opinions or thoughts more so, for fear of being rejected. It can be the worst part of ADHD for many. RSD can make us feel like we are never good enough. For me, when I have what I call an episode of RSD, when I feel rejected in some major way, which, by the way, doesn't happen very often anymore, I personally get flashbacks to my youth. In some cases, I felt neglected as a child, whereas for most people, they would be able to brush off rejection in one way or another. I just couldn't do that. The memories are intense and painful still to this day, but I have coping mechanisms that help. Medication has helped me to some extent, but I want to give you some advice if you're experiencing this. If you have flashbacks, whether to your childhood, to other rejection-based memories, or of a recent event, try this out. Imagine yourself as a child or the age when the event occurred, and hug yourself. Tell them what they needed to hear. Often this is something comforting. You will just know what to say. It will be what you needed in the moment it was happening, but didn't receive. Write down your feelings. All you need to do is write, I feel, and then just let it all out. Once you have done this, try and do something comforting and or playful. If you are having memories triggered from your youth, Do something that you enjoyed as a child, perhaps some form of play, or consider watching something you really like that is nostalgic. Connecting with your inner child will help to move past this rejection better than if you had done nothing. If you aren't having the flashbacks, try comforting yourself in another way, such as having a nice warm bath. This obviously isn't the cure for it, but it might help you. I've been doing this for a few months now, and it really does help. Ignoring the feelings or trying to push them aside will make things worse. Connecting with my emotions is something that I dismissed for a long time, and now I see it as really necessary for my well-being. Going through this process made me realise that there were still things I needed to unpack and deal with. I felt as if 27 years of my life I had been damaged by the effects of undiagnosed ADHD. When you've been rejected so many times, when you've been shown that you aren't capable and have felt behind in life and aren't ever good enough, without ever knowing why, those voices become your inner voice. In the past few months, I've been working on these things and I will continue to do so, but the progress I've made already is really positive. If you suspect you have ADHD and are questioning whether or not you should see a psychiatrist, my only advice is to see a psychiatrist if you can. Our thoughts, emotions, and our lives matter. We deserve to live our best lives, whether that is through taking medication, living the way we want to, fully feeling able to be our unconventional selves, living life to the fullest, or just enjoying the simple pleasures in life. Everyone is worthy of that, including you. Chapter 6. It's been a while since I added to this book. More recently, I've recognised some thoughts I've been having as similar to those I had before I started taking medication, and I've been on some kind of reawakening. It was mostly about the system we live in and how I feel that we are brought up and moulded to live in a system where we can be productive members of society, and our values based from what job you do, how productive you can be, how many hours you work, and if you don't work, then you can be looked down on. In order to provide for ourselves and our families, we must have enough money to survive. This often looks like the majority of people working 40 plus hours a week, doing jobs they probably don't feel fulfilled by, and living month to month on their wages. At school, it often appears that we were raised to be employable. Our value is often based on our grades and our social status and how well we can listen in class, how obedient we can be. That blind obedience can be applied in multiple different areas of life, and I'm sure that you can recognise them for yourself. What happens though when we are brought into the world by people who don't treat us right? Our parents are supposed to be there for us no matter what we are going through, so what if they aren't always? I got a lot of freedom as a teenager and I was never punished. In many ways, I'm really grateful for that. In other ways, it highlighted how much my feelings were disregarded at home. I wasn't treated right and I wasn't supported in the way I needed to be. What happens when you have ADHD but you join the working world? From my research and my experience, if what you are doing keeps your dopamine levels low, then you start to suffer internally. Looking back, as there wasn't much time between my diagnosis and starting medication, I can see what truly made me happy with my ADHD. Our strengths include hyperfocus, or as I see it, our ability to be in creative flow, passion, why we may have so many feelings around our interests, open-mindedness, seeing connections between things, on spontaneity, which helps us to be super creative and innovative. Of course, I see so many more too. If we aren't allowed to embrace these strengths of ours, which also happen to be the things that make us feel our best, then more often than not, it leads to feelings of depression, anxiety, and this stifling of ourselves can also lead to addictions, which many people with ADHD turn to as an escape. I've not done anything more soul-crushing than an office job. Thankfully, that was for only a month, and I only did it because I was desperate for work after being made redundant from my first full-time job. Yet, put me in front of a computer and allow me to write a blog post and I can spend hours in creative flow, unaware of anything that is going on around me and barely stopping to eat food. From experience, we need to be doing something that we love. If our hearts aren't in it, then neither is our attention. When I'm in that zone, it's as if my subject matter and myself integrate with one another and nothing else in the world matters. I started to realise that since I started medication, I haven't felt like that much, and I really miss that. However, I struggle a lot less with negative moods and anxiety, which are making these feelings not worth it. Ask yourself if ADHD is really just a problem with attention and focus, or is it more to do with our inability to conform and be like those who are called productive members of society. I hate that when I've told certain people the way I've felt about this, I've been told to just accept it, it's just the way it is, or worse, that they do as well, but we have to work to survive. I look at them and see them not struggling to stay in the same spot for hours on end, trying so hard to concentrate with all the sounds and conversations going on around them, to the point where they feel like running out the door and never coming back, just so they can keep their sanity. To keep myself going, I'd always tell myself that if I couldn't cope anymore, I could always leave. And this was pretty much on a daily basis. However, my alternative was to struggle financially, and I definitely couldn't put that kind of pressure on my partner. Ever since I was a teenager and had to start thinking about what I wanted for my future, I had decided that the only way I'd be happy was if I worked fully for myself, but without the knowledge of how to do that, it felt hopeless. Perhaps if I had just told someone, they would have helped me. At that point, I had no idea what I wanted to do and just followed what I seemed to be good at academically. Every day that I worked before I started medication, I was overwhelmed, frustrated, and I felt empty. I struggled a lot. Yet I managed to keep this inside, as I knew I was the only one who felt like this, and it would have been me admitting to someone else that I didn't want to be there. It not only made me feel lonely and misunderstood, but it was terribly damaging to my self-esteem, and I cried often. I felt like a person who was just complaining that I should just get on with it like everyone else does. Getting diagnosed freed me from thinking that I just need to try and be like everyone else. However, I can't help now wondering if I took medication to try and make me like everyone else and to be able to live the way we are supposed to. I came to the conclusion that the working world had made my ADHD worse because I had less dopamine than most people, which the workplace did not provide for me, and my life outside of work wasn't enough to sustain me through those really hard times. Not so long ago, I started to read a book by Russell Brand called Revolution. One thing took me by surprise. He was diagnosed with ADHD, but says he doesn't buy into it as a diagnosis. He suggests something like, and I'm definitely paraphrasing, that it was a made-up diagnosis by Big Pharma in order to sell us drugs. This struck me, as I'd had these thoughts before but disregarded them, and I could read on no more. It made me think back to the time I got diagnosed. I didn't want to take medication, but I was struggling so much. My days off at this point were filled up with exploring in nature, delving into my passions, and being creative. I would think that if I could just spend all of my days like this and feel this level of freedom on a daily basis, then I would be fulfilled with life. I mean, obviously, I don't have any evidence to say that that was actually true. Then I'd go back to work and feel the contrast, and I'd long for a different life even more. If ADHD was such a problem in society that is classed as a disorder, then what if our best qualities were utilised to make other people's lives better? I think that everyone who has ADHD has true value to the world, and I just wish the world would recognise us as not having something necessarily wrong with us, but having a different way of perceiving the world around us. That's all. Not faults, but differences. I think this is what makes us with ADHD struggle a lot more than we need to. The thing is, my brain chemistry could now be explained, and it just validated these feelings I have had as long as I could remember, that society told me I shouldn't have. The way I was living wasn't serving me and my ADHD, but I still didn't know how to change it. There was even more evidence of this when I had my DNA analysed. I found a way to plug my raw data into a site called Promethease, where it was run against scientific findings to bring up a report about your genes. I typed in ADHD and several things came up. One of them was about a gene I had called DRD4. I don't fully understand the science around it, but the report told me that I had an increased susceptibility to novelty seeking. Apparently the DRD4 gene is one of the most studied candidates for ADHD. I've learned some interesting things about this gene, such as it's also been associated with substance dependence and the way some people react to stress. However, as genetics is such a complex field, it's not as straightforward as saying that if you have this gene, you have ADHD, but it could mean you're more likely to. Us ADHDers are not made to feel welcome in the society necessarily. But I've come to a place where I feel that it is up to us to maybe change that. Not just by changing the views of others per se, but changing our programming. Deleting the ideas that have been pumped into us that we need to conform to the standards that are set for us, and instead make our own way in this life. I recognise that there are many problems in the system, and this can be seen easily by looking at how many people don't fit in and how much poverty, crime, addiction and mental health issues people have. I spent a lot of time being mad about this, but now I have a fresh perspective that takes the focus away from obligations and standards that are imposed on us and puts it towards finding a way to exist within or on the outskirts of it in order to create a life that fulfills me and makes life truly feel worth living. I recognise that this is a hard thing to do, especially when the future is so uncertain, but that shouldn't put you off trying. Seeing ADHD as a problem with the system rather than in the individual took the blame off myself for some time, but perhaps there is another way to look at it without placing the entire blame on it either. Getting diagnosed comes with a certain level of acceptance. I've read multiple accounts of people getting diagnosed at 50, 60, 70 and beyond, and it's heartbreaking to hear how they feel like their life was a blur and a bad dream, only to discover they have ADHD after years of struggling to get by and live a normal life. I'm here to tell you now that I give you full permission to live the life that you truly want to with your ADHD. It was a realisation that has changed the way I think and feel about myself. No more doing what is supposed to make you feel happy and doing what truly makes you feel happy. You are probably fighting this idea in your head, thinking that it isn't possible, and sadly for some, maybe that's true. Most of us don't have the privilege to spend hours each day exploring our creativity, building a business if we wish to do so. There is definitely a divide between those who have a certain amount of money and those who live from paycheck to paycheck, and that's not even considering how many people with ADHD are tempted to spend impulsively. I know the struggles that consumerism places on us as a society, but when you have ADHD, it can seem like you have no control over your need to spend at times because it gives you a dopamine high, however short-lived. Chapter 7. I came across my old blog that I kept before I knew I had ADHD. I often wrote about rebelling against the system, finding more inner peace, and most importantly, working towards living the life I wanted to live, or my dream life, as I put it. Since I started medication, I had been focusing on the negatives about my ADHD because I had seen such a difference within myself and my ability to cope. I also have more clarity in my thoughts and can think things through without allowing my monkey brain to jump in. For a long time, the good things about medication outweighed the bad. But since I started getting all nostalgic, I've been questioning this a lot. Medication made me lose sight of myself. My view shifted and I forgot what my non-medicated self wanted. I believe that I meditated, did yoga, exercised, and yearned for a different way of life because I needed relief from the mental chaos. With medication, I no longer needed to do those things. I had no motivation for them, and so I rarely did them. I began to feel incredibly sad for myself, and the questioning eventually led to a realization. I had been terribly fearful of not being able to get my medication. How would I ever cope if I didn't have it? Firstly, I knew that it could come along with withdrawal symptoms, but it would be a huge shock to my mind. I wish I could remember who said it, and I can't seem to find out, but one expert said something about what would happen if someone who doesn't have ADHD suddenly had ADHD. They would think they were going crazy and would end up booking themselves into a mental hospital. If you've always been that way and don't know any different, then you will have certain coping mechanisms, even if that ends up in the form of addictions or some kind of escape to numb out how much you're struggling. We can certainly see that with Russell Brand, who is now an activist for issues in the system that don't allow us to feel whole, and using spirituality as a way to deal with feeling unfulfilled as opposed to turning to addiction. In an interview with Piers Morgan, he said that his friends were able to splash their face with water in the morning after taking drugs and get on with it, but he just couldn't do that. Doesn't that make you wonder how many people who get addicted to drugs aren't just doing it because of how the drugs work, but because they are struggling and drugs seem to be their only escape? At my lowest, I actually had the thought that if I couldn't deal with my mind anymore, I could always turn to drugs. I almost feel ashamed to admit it, but it's why I can show more understanding towards people who actually took that action or continue to. I owe it to the person I was before I took medication to not forget what it was that I wanted for my life. Not just to be able to accept myself fully for who I was, or more accurately, who I am deep down, but to be able to live a fulfilled life. By taking medication, I feel in a way that I have rejected my real self. Looking back on this now, I have a different opinion, and I'll get into that in a bit. I think this is a valid feeling that many people have, or fear they may have. I took medication to make it easier to be me, and I take full responsibility for that. And I know medication does help me so much, but it's made me think that if there's another way to honour myself and find balance between how difficult my life was before medication and some of these recent feelings I've been having. I think the first thing would be to allow myself to realign with my views I had before I was happily taking medication. The second is to use the abilities medication has given me to build the life I originally wanted. The third and final thing is to rethink medication. The type of medication I am on can be thought of like a titration. The first day you might feel something, but as the days go on, you see it affect you more and more. Then you increase the dose with the help of your doctor and you find the best one for you. I remember thinking that I was happy enough staying on the first dose I tried, but my doctor doing his job wanted to find the highest one I could tolerate to get the most effective results. When I went too high, I had some unwanted effects, and so I went down to the previous one. During the beginning of the pandemic, I was feeling increasingly anxious and low, and so I asked to try a higher dose again. The side effects came back, but I tried to stick for it for longer. I decided to go back down, and I felt relief pretty soon on. But then, a few weeks later, I started to feel panicky and anxious a lot more. The medication I am on also takes a while to get out of your system, because just as it builds up, it does the opposite when you come off it. Sorry, I've read. The thing is, there are other types of medication that I've never tried. There are multiple stimulants that do get a bad rep for being used recreationally. It makes me so mad to know there are people out there who don't even have ADHD putting down stimulants because they can be abused. They are like small doses of heroin, apparently. It makes me mad because they disregard the struggles of people with ADHD and don't give any alternatives on how to cope. Plus, the point is that it is a small, controlled dose. Just like you might abuse painkillers, you might also take them for pain for a short period of time in smaller amounts. How could they possibly know what it is like to cope with a condition that leads to many people feeling less than others, become addicted to dangerous drugs, alcohol, or something else, commit crimes, and live shorter lifespans? If someone decides to take medication to cope, then there is absolutely no shame about that. This is why I found it so hard to face the idea that I might be taking medication to essentially numb the real me. I had to do it because I wasn't coping and I needed a break from my head. But I can't deny that I also didn't accept myself until I started taking it. Perhaps I can consider discussing the possibility of different medication that I don't have to take every single day. How will I ever know if I can thrive without medication if I've never really tried? As I didn't even know I had ADHD before, so I didn't even know how to help myself effectively. How will I know if the life I've built will be enough for myself without medication for what at the moment feels like my real authentic self? How will I know that my growth over the last few years has been due to medication or a result of my own inner growth? I could come down a dose or two, or I could try stimulants or anti-anxiety medication. I was led to believe that my only option was to take this medication for the rest of my life, and maybe I will just continue to do that, but it's really great to have options and to not be limited. I believe in everyone's right to choose if they want to take medication, to stop medication, or not to try it at all. I used to wonder why anyone would choose not to take it, even though at first I didn't want to. I'm glad I did, but I'm also glad that I have had these recent revelations. Although just a few weeks into the experiment of trying a lower dose, I was struggling so much. Ideas flowed through me, and that seemed like a great thing initially, but the struggles of day-to-day life soon came rushing back. I was doing things without thinking and making mistakes, but ultimately my anxiety had gotten really bad and life was overwhelming. Just a few milligrams less had this huge effect on my well-being. Feeling defeated, I raised my dose again, and within a few weeks, I was feeling really good again. The main thing I noticed with medication is the calmness it brings me within. For all my life, I was seeking inner peace and serenity, and medication, although it might feel like I've taken a shortcut at times. ADHD is actually a disorder that most people don't have, and so to have suffered with no calm for most of my life, I believe I deserve to have that in my life today. Since taking medication, I've achieved so much. Yet the biggest thing is that I actually enjoy my day-to-day life now. The simple pleasures in life were never enough in the past. I couldn't even feel gratitude. Yet now I wake up most days happy to go to work rather than afraid, admiring the nature on my way to work, happy to keep up with the things in my life that as an adult can be extremely difficult with ADHD, happy to just be present with myself, others, and the world around me. I used to work so hard on mindfulness and meditation just so I could experience some of these feelings, but as soon as they were over, the symptoms came back and my mind continued to function in hyper speed mode again. Looking back at myself before I even got a diagnosis, I've always seen a struggling girl who didn't know the words to describe what she was going through. Now I have those words, but since this little experiment, I also have a deep compassion for her. None of this was ever her fault, my fault. Whenever I am reminded of my life with ADHD, such as when a certain song comes on the radio, I feel compassion for who I used to be. My ADHD isn't gone or suppressed, it still lives within me. It's not a shadow or something I am afraid of, nor is it a threat that one day I may have to endure it again. Instead, it shows up as an old friend I will pass one day on the street that I've not seen in a while. I know it exists within myself and has a huge impact on who I am today, and I still choose to engage with it occasionally. As we walk past each other, I give a gentle nod, acknowledging to my past self and to everyone else who has ADHD that I see you, have compassion for you, and I understand. We all deserve the chance at living a good life that we can actually enjoy, whether you treat your ADHD or not, because not everyone can take medication after all. I believe we also deserve to be accepted and accept ourselves again whenever you choose to treat your ADHD or not, and live a life embracing and loving our differences, away from the expectations placed on us by teachers, the government, employers, just people around us in general. Society as a whole may never understand, but there are so many other ADHDers who can, and many other people who will accept you for who you are. You know what you've been through. Never give up on yourself. Thanks for listening to what I have to say.